robust debate. Both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good morning and welcome to Sunday with me, Arlene Foster. We've 2 hours of political and topical debate. Well, we've got a packed show coming up and right off the bat, we're looking at the race for number 10 as Prime Minister Rishi Sunak declares he's on the side of the motorist and also takes a swipe at Sir Keir Starmer for lacking principles. Then I'll be joined by Lord Ed Vaizey, former Minister for Culture, who will have his say on the scandal that has rocked both the City of Westminster and the City of London. Just how did NatWest manage to mishandle the issue of Nigel Farage's bank account so spectacularly? And how can we get back to a time when access to basic necessities like a bank account didn't depend on your values? And we've also got another Lord coming up because I've got my former party colleague, Lord Nigel Dodds, on the programme. He'll be telling us why the new Windsor framework, which is about to be imposed on Northern Ireland, actually, from his point of view, makes the situation worse for business owners there. And speaking of business owners, Graham and Leanne Carling have turned themselves into multi-millionaires by patiently building up their property empire. But as more and more buy-to-let landlords sell up, we'll be asking them if what the future is for the housing market and what their role is in it. All of that to come, but first of all, here's your latest news headlines with Ray.
Thanks, Arlene. Good morning. It's 1 minute past 11. Here's the latest from the GB Newsroom. And our top story this hour, former Home Secretary Dame Priti Patel has told GB News the government needs to clamp down on, quote, lefty lawyers to stop illegal migration. She says the Attorney-General and the Lord Chancellor need to take action over how law firms behave. That's as the number of channel crossings continues to climb, with more than 14,000 people intercepted in small boats so far this year. Dame Priti warns the clock is ticking for the government to implement its new illegal migration bill.
We need a deterrent factor for a start, and removals and returns. My Rwanda plan was central to that. The returns agreements that, you know, I have put in place and others are now putting in place. We have to get planes leaving the country and show that if you come here illegally, you can't just get a free pass. Being firm is actually the stance that we should take, and that means removing people and returning people to other third countries or country of origin.
The Energy and Security Secretary says he and his family have struggled to open accounts at major banks in the wake of the Nigel Farage row. Grant Shapps told the Sun newspaper the problem stems from being a politically exposed person, and he accused banks of going too far. It comes as Mr Farage launched a new website to help people who, like him, have had their bank accounts forcibly closed. The GB News presenter says 1,000 accounts are being shut every day.
What I've learned in the 3 weeks since I came out, as it were, I've just been inundated by small businesses, by folk all around the country, people in absolute fear, terror, lives being ruined, thousands of businesses being closed.
The Prime Minister is ordering a review into the rollout of low-traffic neighbourhoods. The scheme, which has been used by councils to stop drivers cutting through residential areas, has been seen by some as an attack on motorists. In an interview with the Sunday Telegraph, Rishi Sunak said he supports people's rights to use their cars to do all the things that matter to them. Shadow International Trade Secretary Nick Thomas-Symonds told us the PM should leave the decision to local areas.
Our position is that it is for communities to make these decisions, whether it is in terms of low traffic neighbourhoods, where, by the way, there are communities up and down the country who want to reduce traffic going through their neighbourhoods, whether it is in terms of clean air zones. We've talked obviously specifically about ULEZ. Yes, we certainly believe a well-planned low traffic neighbourhood is a good thing.
The government's energy security plans will be unveiled this week, aiming to, quote, power up Britain from Britain. The Prime Minister and the Energy Security Secretary are due to meet bosses from the UK's oil and gas, renewable and nuclear industries. They're expected to reveal a raft of new investment plans, driven in part by the need for greater energy independence since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The HS2 programme has been given a red rating by the infrastructure watchdog. It believes the timetable for construction of the first 2 phases of the rail line from London to Birmingham and then on to Crewe are unachievable. The IPA's annual report, which follows the resignation of Chief Executive Mark Thurston, cites major issues with the schedule and the budget. HS2 was initially slated to open in 2026, but this has now been delayed by up to 7 years. Russia's state news agency says a Ukrainian drone attack over Moscow has damaged buildings and injured 1 person. The local airport was subsequently closed for arrivals and departures as 2 drones were shot down. It comes just hours after President Putin told a meeting of African leaders that Ukrainian attacks made peace talks hard to realise. President Zelensky has rejected the idea of a ceasefire, which would leave Russia in control of nearly a fifth of his country and give Kremlin forces time to regroup. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get straight back to Dame Arlene.
And welcome to the show, and thanks to Ray for that update with all of our headlines there. Well, Rishi Sunak is set to pour millions into a carbon capture project in the North Sea, hoping to outflank Labour on oil and gas, whilst creating 21,000 new jobs. The Prime Minister will meet energy bosses this week to lay out plans for energy security in Britain. This comes as net zero and ULEZ face increasing scrutiny. Well, our reporter Olivia Otley is in Bexley, where the issue of net zero is a hot topic. Hi, Olivia. Well, of course, Bexley was one of those councils that took Sadiq Khan to court over the extension of his ultra-low emissions zone. Tell us what the feeling is there in Bexley about all of this net zero issue.
Yeah, I've been chatting to residents of Bexley this morning, and there are certainly very, very strong feelings about the ULEZ charge, actually ultra-low emissions charge, being expanded into those outer London boroughs. I spoke to one person who said that he thought the whole policy was cruel, and he pointed out the ULEZ charges, if you have one of the more polluting older vehicles, then already in central London and soon in outer London, you will have to pay a £12.50 fee in order to drive around. One resident pointed out that he knows a nurse who does night shifts who will have to pay £12.50 one day at the beginning of her night shift when she goes out, and then will have to pay another £12.50 on her way back because it'll be a different day. That is £50 a day for a nurse struggling with the cost of living crisis. There is pretty much universal disagreement with Sadiq Khan on ULEZ here, but there's a little bit of tension over whether it'll actually change minds at a general election. Of course, we saw in Uxbridge a couple of weeks ago, voters, it was essentially turned into a referendum on ULEZ, and voters sort of revolted against Labour and elected a Conservative MP. Whether that'll be replicated at a national level in the next general election remains to be seen. There are quite a few people I've spoken to here who say they don't like ULEZ at all, but they're fed up with the Conservatives and so will be voting Labour anyway. That's the feeling this morning. I'll have to wait and see.
Well, Olivia, it's clearly an issue which the Prime Minister thinks is worth pursuing because, of course, he gave a very big interview this morning to the Sunday Telegraph, essentially saying that he was going to review all of these low-emission areas. Do you think he sees it as a way in which to unite Tories behind him?
Well, absolutely. I think this is a really good example of what Rishi Sunak calls a wedge issue between himself and Keir Starmer. After those 2 by-election defeats and 1 by-election victory a couple of weeks ago, Rishi Sunak has said quite openly that what he plans to do is find issues, local issues, like ULEZ, like LTNs, those low-traffic neighbourhoods, where local people really feel very, very strongly about it. People who might be minded to vote Labour off the back of the Conservatives' record over the last 13 years, but feel so strongly about this specific issue that they might be willing to vote Conservative again. So Rishi Sunak and his team are very much on the hunt for these sort of wedge issues at the moment, and I think he's really hoping on this in particular to sort of get some clear blue water between himself and Keir Starmer on these green policies. Of course, the problem for Rishi Sunak is that it isn't just Labour who are having internal disagreements about green policy at the moment. Yes, Sadiq Khan, the London Mayor, and Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, disagree with each other, but so does Rishi Sunak, some of his backbenchers, and of course some Conservative environmentalists. Rishi Sunak is under pressure from both sides. There are plenty of sort of slightly more centrist, perhaps slightly more left of the party Conservative MPs who really want to see the government putting net zero at the very top of its priority list. And then there are those in perhaps more rural constituencies, perhaps more sort of traditional Thatcherite MPs who feel that growth should be top of the agenda and that net zero and proper economic growth are incompatible. So Rishi Sunak is facing pressure from both sides at the moment. It'll be really interesting to see on which side he comes down.
Olivia, there in Bexley, thank you so much for joining us this morning on the programme. Well, I'm now joined by GB News senior political commentator Nigel Nelson. We're going to chew over all of that and more. Nigel, lovely to see you again. And as I've referenced, the Sunday Telegraph has this huge interview with the Prime Minister and it's headlined, "I'm on motorists' side." So they're taking that Uxbridge by-election result and they're really putting it across the country.
Yes, they are. And the trouble is, I think that all politicians seem to have gone wobbly about climate change or tackling it as a result of one rather bizarre by-election result.
Or was it building up to that by-election result? Because there were, of course, noises before the by-election result, and it's almost as if the result then confirmed what a lot of people thought.
Yes, and again, it's a question of getting the balance right, obviously. But the important thing is, if you want to get to net zero by 2050, we're all going to have to actually pay for it in one way or another. And it might be ULEZ schemes in different towns. It might be easing planning restrictions so you end up with a wind farm on your doorstep. So, and voters seem to be a bit sort of all over the place on this, that all the polls are saying that climate change is now the fourth most important concern for voters after cost of living, NHS and immigration. And yet when it comes down to being asked to pay for it, they're not so keen. This has obviously got both Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak worried, and they're now trying to find a way around this.
Well, it has got them worried, and that's why the PM is taking out this interview today and engaging in a review on these low transmission areas. And he's also talking now about new licences for oil and gas, which is something that a lot of people will be upset about as well. On the other hand, some people will see it as dealing with our energy security crisis.
Well, yes, it depends. I mean, it's a very managerial way of doing it. I think we've got basically two people vying for number 10, or Rishi Sunak trying to stay in there, who are both kind of managers. And so Rishi Sunak is sort of sending a bit of a mixed message here. First of all, he's talking about supporting the car driver. Fine. Then tomorrow he goes off to Aberdeen to talk about carbon storage in the North Sea. So it's almost like a metaphorical reduction in his carbon footprint, that he's doing one and then doing the other. I think the problem we're facing at the moment over the whole climate change issue is that it's some way away, and what politicians do is they care about the next election, not the next century. And we suffered the same thing when it came down to an ageing population. We knew 40 years ago that around about now there would be a crisis in the NHS, pensions would become unsustainable. Nobody acted 40 years ago to do something about that, whether you could have gradually increased the pension age by, say, a month a year or something like that. And as a result, it was all done in one go. And it seems to be that politicians sort of think, look, if actually this is sometime in the future, we don't have to bother with it.
But there is a somewhat of hysteria over climate change, and then on the other hand, you've people that are arguing, well, climate change doesn't exist and it's just the normal run of things. I think what most people, the area where most people are, is that they recognise there is a need to deal with climate change. But when it comes to paying for it, when they're in a cost of living crisis, it's a very difficult decision to have to take now, Nigel. And I thought the intervention by Lord Hammond was very actually telling, where he said that he told Theresa May back in when he was her Chancellor that it was going to cost £1 trillion to get to net zero by 2050. I mean, that's an enormous amount.
It's huge. I mean, that is gigantic. I think that might be offset somewhat by the kind of economic growth that we could actually prosper from if we started doing the right thing. So Keir Starmer is talking about making Britain a green energy superpower. Part of that involves growing the economy. We'd have a whole host of new jobs in green industries. So there are sort of trade-offs when you do that.
But do you think people believe that? I mean, do you think when people say, well, actually, if you invest in dealing with climate now, it will actually mean more jobs in the medium to longer term? Do you think people actually believe that, or is that part of the problem?
I think that they're more worried about the jobs they might lose in the interim,
exactly.
which is the problem area.
Yeah. OK, Nigel, well, I think you're going to stay with me throughout the show, and I'm delighted about that. But after the break, I'm going to be joined by Lord Ed Vaizey to get his take on the Nigel Farage against NatWest banking scandal. But first, it's the latest weather. Stay with us.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vaughtry here with your latest GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. We have two areas of low pressure with us at the moment. The first, tracking its way across northern areas of Scotland, bringing this secluded front with some showers at times. The second one pushing its way into the southwest. We've already started to see some rain move into southwest England, turning heavier for parts of Wales into Northern Ireland later on as well, and certainly the sky is turning quite grey through here. Some sunnier spells still in between the showers that bubble up across northern England into Scotland, but some of those showers still on the sharp side in places. Temperatures ranging between 18 and 20 degrees Celsius, perhaps 22 across the far east of England, but increasingly humid as we head into tonight with this rain and cloud pushing its way through, breezy as well, particularly gusty around some coastal areas. Outbreaks of rain continuing for many, progressing its way up into Scotland, but it's the far north of Scotland that will likely stay dry with some clearer spells, and under those clearer skies will turn a bit chillier down to around 5 degrees Celsius in some sheltered villages Much warmer and more humid start to everywhere else on Monday morning. The rain tracking across the Channel Islands, lingering along some coast of southern England, but a few brighter spells trying to develop in places that still with the risk of showers at times. The rain looking like it will push into northern areas of Scotland, but generally central southern Scotland as well, seeing some more persistent areas of rain. Generally feeling rather cool for most of us with all of that rain and clouds around, and further unsettled spells, particularly to come on Wednesday. Bye-bye.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "No, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching. Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the show. Well, Energy Security Secretary Grant Shapps has told The Sun that he and his family have struggled to open accounts at major banks in the wake of the Nigel Farage debanking affair. It comes as the GB News presenter launched a new website to help people who, like him, have had their bank accounts forcibly closed. Launching accountclosed.org, he says it's time to fight back and calls it a national scandal.
We can only do this by getting together collectively. I am absolutely committed to solving this problem. I don't know whether it can happen quickly or whether it's going to be a long haul. But either way, It's happened to me. I know it's happened to tens of thousands of you. I am now going to be volunteering to be your champion. I think we can bring about real fundamental change, and it will be my honor to do so. So please help me to help you.
Well, yesterday, arch Remainer and founder of the True and Fair Party, Gina Miller, revealed that she too has had accounts closed. Nigel Farage publicly backed his political opponent after her party account with digital bank Monzo was pulled. Now, someone who knows all about what it's like to get a bank account when you're in politics is Lord Ed Vaizey, who joins me now live from Cornwall. Thanks very much, Ed, for joining us this morning. For a lot of people watching the show, listening to the show, this will be the first time that they've heard about politically exposed persons. Do you want to take the opportunity to explain what politically exposed persons are and why they are looked at in a different way by banking institutions?
So there's a regulation, which is an international regulation, but we've adopted the European standard, which is a far higher standard, that covers what are known as politically exposed persons, or PEPs. And it's actually quite a wide group of people. It's not just serving politicians, people in the House of Commons and House of Lords. It also encompasses their families. It includes their wives, husbands, partners, children, even their mothers and fathers. It includes councillors. It includes top police officers, top military people, top civil servants. So it could be hundreds of thousands of people. The benign reason for the PEPs is that banks are asked to just do more detailed checks on people when they want to apply for a bank account to combat things like fraud or money laundering or the risk of bribery and so on. But the regulations, if you read them, and a child of 5 could read them and understand them, are very clear. It says that British PEPs are very low risk. Their families are the lowest risk possible. And each case has to be treated individually, and no one should be refused a bank account because they're a PEP. Unfortunately, the banks have taken the path of least resistance. They send hugely onerous and intrusive forms to people who are PEPs and their families. My 85-year-old mother got a 12-page form from the bank where she's banked for 20 or 30 years. They've taken away Kenneth Clark's credit card because he refused to fill out the forms, a credit card he'd had for 50 years, a former Chancellor of the Exchequer. Because they can't be bothered to do what the regulations state, which is to treat each case individually and approach it with common sense. And it's caused an enormous amount of frustration. You may not sympathise, not you personally, Eileen, but your viewers may not sympathise with a politician like me, but you would sympathise with somebody whose father, for example, could no longer receive their state pension because their bank account had been closed because they committed the crime of having fathered a politician. It's an outrageous way. Monzo is a very good example of a bank that is under investigation by the FCA because it's a neobank and it's easy to open an account. And they've taken the view that they simply will not give a bank account to any PEP while they're under investigation. It's outrageous.
Well, it is outrageous, and thank you for mentioning the fact that it's not just politicians like you and I that are politically exposed persons, it's our families as well, and so they can be denied bank accounts for no obvious reason, about the fact that they're a son of a politician or a father or a mother, as you've rightly said. But you have indicated in a piece that you wrote for The Times that you have been raising this issue for quite some time in terms of the disproportionality, but nobody was really listening, and it took someone like Nigel Farage to be debanked for someone to sit up and say, well, this is wrong.
Yeah, it's really annoying because obviously I don't agree with Nigel Farage or his views, being myself an arch Remainer. But the fact remains that very senior members of the House of Lords, not just me, but lots of Conservative and Labour peers have been raising this issue. There's a Labour Baroness called Diane Hayter who's been raising it for many, many years now. We've had debates in the House of Lords where people have raised their personal circumstances. We've had meetings with the FCA and ministers, and all we've been given are soft, soapy words. The minute Nigel Farage gets into trouble, the entire government machine turned round to solve the problem, including the Chancellor of the Exchequer, the banks, all the chief executives of the banks were summoned to a meeting. That never happened when we raised the case with the government. To be fair, Nigel's case is the most egregious example because I would not for a moment suggest that I'd had any problems because of my political views, nor indeed many of the other people who've had problems. This is the first case I came across, and I didn't believe it at first until Nigel did his subject access request, that a bank could seriously take a view that they wouldn't give a bank account to someone because they disagreed with their political views. So I can understand perhaps why the government took this particular case more seriously, but it is frustrating for those of us who simply wanted common sense.
And I have to say that the subject access request, which you've referred to, and which Nigel said this morning, he didn't even know what a subject access request was until he had to put one in. I mean, I was very concerned about the fact that they were holding information like that on an individual, 40 pages of commentary in relation to his political views. Surely that's something the Information Commissioner should be looking into as well. And do you think, finally, before I let you go, that this matter, when the Commons and the Lords comes back, will be an issue that will certainly be debated on the House floor?
Yeah, I hope it will be. I mean, what kind of information do banks keep on us? I mean, I've no idea whether my bank monitors what I say in Parliament. I'd be absolutely shocked if they did so. It's completely irrelevant. There is only one thing which they can look into legitimately, which is this person potentially subject to pressure from outside interests, or could they use their position to facilitate money laundering? I think in 99.9% of cases, common sense would show that wasn't the case. But the idea that you would hold this kind of data on one of your customers is completely unacceptable.
Yeah. Well, listen, thanks very much, Ed, for joining us this morning. Thanks to Lord Vasey for joining us.
Arlene.
And I'm now going to have a conversation about this with economist Justin Stewart. Justin, I mean, how do we get into this position where banks are imposing their views on the people that are banking with them?
Well, one of the great fashion fads you've got at the moment, which has come through, and is how to behave. We've had these initials in the city, ESG.
Yes.
Environmental, sustainable and governance. So this is a great excuse to sit there and say, we're now going to behave very properly. So we'll make sure now we're actually going to check up on, well, just about anything in order to prove whether it's environmental or whether it's political or anything. And there's no, they can move anywhere they like if they so wish. And of course, it's much easier to sit there and say, we'll make this as tough as we possibly can, because no one can criticise us. And yet, as a result of this, you now have a policy, an issue, which has united all the parties remarkably, particularly around...
Eventually.
Yes, it's quite astonishing.
Yeah.
So the banks have made themselves look stupid. Let's be absolutely clear. There's one thing in terms of controlling where money comes from, money laundering and dealing with dodgy Russians and things like that. It's another thing, having a bank account. It's like having a gas account. Yeah. It's a process that you ought to have. Years ago, we actually did put in the old Gyro Bank, everyone was supposed to be able to have a bank account, going through the post office and things like that. That's sort of disappeared rather now, but people should go back to actually having a bank account as part of your standard process. That's how you run your life. You can't do it without it.
Yeah.
In terms of then checking about where your money's coming from, where you put it, where it's gone, and how you're investing it, and in terms of your social background, in terms of are you a person of suspicious nature in terms of money laundering, and I have to say our history on that has not been good over the past few decades, particularly in the City of London, and therefore you bring back to practicality. How do you actually just run ordinary bank accounts of people with sensible evaluation of what's necessary? Grow up, City.
Well, I mean, to me, they seem to have moved away from the very basic piece of banking to all of this value-driven stuff about, well, we have to have a policy on this and we have to have a policy on that. But the main issue of banking seems to have got lost in all of that.
And banking is it's quite a standard process, but with some strict rules about it, such as you do not disclose client information. That's fundamental.
And that's the fundamental issue why Alison Rose had to go.
Absolutely. Now, I mean, I'm sure she didn't mean to do it, but he wasn't realising what was going on, so you have a jolly nice supper. But fundamentally, if you do not do that, if you're a doctor, you don't disclose your patient's information. It wouldn't even occur to you. Yeah. I'm afraid you need to get back to some processes in banking. How do you behave properly in business? And actually making sure you're doing it practically for people, and actually realising it's a privilege to look after people's money, not a right, and therefore you have to behave properly to your clients. And at the moment, they're sitting there, they can hide behind this, whether it's green issues or political issues, this, that and the other. We've got our standards, we're not participating in it. I'm sorry, that's not good enough.
Yeah. And I thought it was very interesting speaking to Lord Vasey there about the politically exposed person regulations. And of course, those regulations were, as you said, to come into force to stop money laundering, to stop fraud and money coming in from suspicious places. But in fact, they're now being used. Oh, I can't be bothered banking that person. We'll just turn them down because they're politically exposed.
Well, but it's Ken Clark's credit card or someone's...
unreal.
Or your father's, no, because if you're a politician but your father happens to, then they can't have a bank account. Oh, this is just childish. And so I'm afraid this is... And where does this come down to? Not just the banks, it's also regulators understanding, actually, they don't just have to hide behind regulations and said, this is what we've done to protect things, actually realise what banking systems are for. If you don't have a proper banking system, funny enough, your economy doesn't work very well. And we need to have that functioning properly so there's more investment coming in, there's more confidence in banking. At the moment, what we're doing is actually pushing away money from investing, not just in banks, but actually in Britain, because people are sitting there saying, what are you lot doing? I'll go somewhere else.
Yeah, and that is very concerning. Finally, Justin, I mean, we've heard from Ed Vasey, he's been raising this issue for years. Others have been raising it for years. Nobody passed any remarks. They said that, yes, we understand your problem. It took Nigel Farage being debanked to get a reaction from the government. Now, as we've heard, it's because they had this dossier on him about his views and why he shouldn't be a client of Coots.
That's sinister enough.
But I find that very sinister. I mean, goodness knows we'll all be having these subject access requests now to see what they have about all of us. But this campaign will go on now. And definitely there'll be, when the House of Commons returns, there will be an issue that will have to be resolved around this PEP issue.
Yeah, I mean, because it's just not fair. Absolutely clear what's going on, and actually realise you've actually got to have a professional banking system which is there to do its primary purpose, so actually making sure money's going through. You have the controls, but the controls are then reasonably done and then properly regulated, not over-regulated by protecting yourself by saying we've actually got policies on everything from green to politics. I'm sorry, that's just an excuse. Also, hopefully we could get rid of the world's worst new verb, debanking. Where did that come from?
Absolutely. And Justin, thanks so much for coming in, and thanks for looking like a banker in your red today. It's very good to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, a new report into the Windsor framework by the House of Lords Committee has cast fresh light on the controversial deal struck by Rishi Sunak in an attempt to resolve the problems of the Northern Ireland Protocol. The Lords Select Committee says that whilst the Windsor framework is an improvement on the onerous restrictions of the protocol, serious concerns remain. To take just one example, the supply of more than half of veterinary medicines to Northern Ireland from the rest of the UK would be prohibitive if the deal is fully implemented. Well, I'm delighted to say that I'm now joined by Lord Nigel Dodds. Nigel, really good to see you this morning.
Morning, Ari.
Yeah.
Morning, Ari.
Nigel, we all remember when the Windsor framework was published back in February of this year, and we were told that in a blaze of publicity that it was going to solve all the difficulties of the protocol. This report says something completely different. Tell us about it.
Well, the report is the report of the Select Committee in the House of Lords on the protocol, now called the Windsor Framework, but essentially the same thing with a few tweaks. And it cuts through the hype and the spin that the government has launched around the Windsor Framework. It was launched, as you say, with great fanfare by the Prime Minister in February, but shrouded in ambiguity and misrepresentation ever since. The Commons was never allowed a proper vote and debate on the overall framework, just various statutory instruments. And this report cuts through all of that hype and spin, taking evidence from right across the board, businesses, stakeholders, politicians, and has come to some very serious conclusions, which I think will make very uncomfortable reading for the government, in that it confirms that whilst it may be better than the protocol, the original protocol as it was agreed, but of course that original protocol was never implemented. It had a lot of grace periods and easements because to implement it fully would have destroyed the Northern Ireland economy. But what it finds is that for many businesses, this Windsor framework will be worse in terms of burdens and duties and red tape and costs than what we have in the current arrangements since Brexit. And that is something that should worry everybody in Northern Ireland, whether you're a unionist or a nationalist or whatever political persuasion you are.
And Nigel, when I was reading through the report, which is quite a hefty report, and obviously there was a lot of work put into it, and as you say, you've heard from a wide range of people and taken a lot of evidence. one of the things that the Windsor framework introduced was this concept of green lanes and red lanes. And in the report, it says, while the green lanes will benefit large retailers in particular, some retailers and other sectors may have to use the red lane. Explain that to us.
Yeah, we have now this bizarre situation where goods moving within the United Kingdom have to go through these lanes, which is going to cause real problems. The FSB were criticising the situation the other day, saying that there was going to be a real problem come October when this is supposed to be coming into force. So people who the only people who can use green lanes are really large retailers whose end destination for those goods is in Northern Ireland and who apply not for EU labels, but for virtually everybody else. Other retailers, manufacturers, meat for processing, grain to be used to feed animals. Vast swathes of goods coming from Britain to Northern Ireland have to use this red lane. And this red lane, what is it? It's a full customs checks, documentation, as if you were sending to the European Union. So this idea that Rishi Sunak said that he had removed through the Windsor framework any notion or any idea or any sense of an Irish sea border is, I'm afraid, debunked completely by this report, which confirms what businesses and hauliers and others had been telling us in any case. And one of the other most worrying aspects of this is that EU law, we were told that 1,700 pages had been disapplied, that wonderful things were happening, EU law was being lifted. That turns out not to be the case. In fact, Northern Ireland businesses trading within Northern Ireland, within Britain, the UK, sending to the rest of the world, no trade at all with the European Union, still have to manufacture their goods and be regulated by European Union law. And the report finds that that will put them at a competitive disadvantage compared to their British counterparts. And that's really totally unacceptable.
Well, there's the competitive disadvantage point and the fact that they're still under the jurisdiction of the court in Europe. But there's a democratic deficit issue as well, isn't there, Nigel? The fact that because we're in the single market for goods in Northern Ireland, we have to take the laws and regulations from the European Union. However, we have no democratic say in those laws at all.
Yes, I mean, the report finds that there's no change whatsoever to the role and jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice of the European Union. And as you say, we have a situation where laws are going to be made over vast swathes and are being made, as we saw with the Parcels Directive just last week, where the government had to sack 5 of its MPs and replace them on the committee to get the parcels border enforced between Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom. Utterly ridiculous scenes in Parliament. But we have a situation where laws are being imposed on Northern Ireland without any say or vote by any elected representative, either in the Stormont Assembly in Belfast or in the Houses of Parliament, our Supreme Parliament. So this is a completely undemocratic situation, which should concern all politicians in Britain and Northern Ireland. And sadly, there are people who are cheerleading for the protocol, who said that it should be rigorously implemented, who seem to want to deny to themselves the powers that any Democrat should want, which is to make the laws and to set the laws for the people that they represent in the area that they represent. So it's a bizarre situation. We're fighting this cause for democracy and for the getting rid of this Irish sea border, not just for unionists in Northern Ireland, who of course feel very strongly, but for everybody who, as we've seen from this report, are going to be disadvantaged as a result of this Windsor framework.
And finally, Nigel, you mentioned Stormont there. Of course, Stormont isn't running at this present time because of the protocol and because now of the Windsor framework. Do you see any route back to Stormont in the next couple of months?
Well, look, all of us who are involved in politics, and you and I have been involved for a long time, want to see government restored in Northern Ireland if we possibly can. But the UK government has a mighty responsibility here. It gave pledges and promises to the people that it would get rid of this Irish sea border, that it would deal with the democratic deficit and deal with diversion of trade and all these problems that are affecting us as a result of the protocol and this Windsor framework. It is yet to deliver on that. So the ball's very much in the court of the government. It did bring forward proposals through the protocol bill, which it has now dropped. There are suggestions such as mutual enforcement and other means by which the government could wrest back control over the laws that govern us in part of the United Kingdom. And I think the onus is very much now on the government to do that. And until it deals with that issue and delivers on the promises that it made, then I'm afraid we could be in for a more period of instability. We don't want to see that, but it's very much the responsibility of Rishi Sunak and his government now to deal with it.
Nigel, thanks so much for joining us this morning. And after the break, I'm going to be joined by the couple who gave up their jobs to build a multi-million-pound property empire to ask whether landlords are being scapegoated for the housing crisis.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle. Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point. And action.
Sergeant, the big read by superstar panel that are already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons? I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Welcome back to the show. Well, it's more than 2 months now since Michael Gove introduced the Renters Reform Bill. It was brought into Parliament in order to protect tenants in the housing market. Many landlords feel the bill puts extra burdens on their businesses. But the last week, the Levelling Up Secretary has said private landlords are vital to the private rental sector. So which is it? Do landlords have a part to play in the housing market? And how do we solve the record numbers of people living in temporary accommodation? Well, to answer that, I'm joined by a couple who started to pile into the housing market just as everybody else was running out of it. Leanne and Graham Carling bought their first rental property in the middle of the financial crash of 2007-2008. Welcome to the show. Really pleased to have you on the show today. And I suppose I just wanted to ask whether you believe, as landlords, whether you have a vital role to play in the housing market, as Michael Gove has said.
Well, thanks for having us on, Arlene. I do think that, and I do believe that landlords do play a huge part in the housing crisis, because we do provide safe, affordable accommodation for renters. But with the changes, etc., that are coming into play, landlords are being squeezed.
Yeah, and we're told today that over 100,000 people are in temporary accommodation. That's basically in hotels and hostels. And that's the highest since records have begun in 1998. Surely there's a role for people like yourselves to try and make sure that, as well as social houses, there are houses for people to move into.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, that's an incredible amount of, you know, temporary accommodation, people in temporary accommodation. And I think that's, you know, what we've seen over the years since we've been involved back in 2007 and 8. There has been a squeeze. There's such a squeeze in terms of the regulation, taxation, the legislation around landlords that actually, if you just look at the numbers, it's a very difficult investment for anybody that would even be minded to get into it. So what you're seeing is a slow exodus. I say slow because these rules have been coming in for the last 10 years. Of course, a number of the new policies that they're talking about bringing in England have been in play in Scotland for a number of years. So what we've seen has been a quiet, if you like, where some of the larger landlords have just simply exited by selling their properties. That has reduced the amount for rent, leaving less available for people to rent, and therefore you're seeing this increase in temporary accommodation.
Yeah, and one of the Gove recommendations is that you will be able to turn shops in the high streets and takeaways and betting shops and what have you into living spaces again. I mean, do you think that's a good idea, Graham and Leanne? Do you think that's something that will help open up the market?
Yeah, definitely. But I'll tell you, that's a lot easier said than done.
Yeah.
We've done that. We have converted empty buildings, schools, churches, hotels, pubs. We've done all that. The problem is the length of time that these developments or redevelopments take. Absolutely, it would make sense to repurpose some of these commercial properties that likely won't ever be, you know, a pub again or a betting shop again or something, just because of or even banks that are moving on to online. So certainly it's certainly something that should be looked at. The problem we've found in doing those conversions has been in the planning, the length of planning, the cost of funds, and there's complications that come up when you go through that process. So it's not, you know, to do a betting shop, convert it into 1 or 2 flats, for example, can take you 5 years. That's the problem.
Yeah. And those 5 years are presumably not down to the length of time it takes to do the physical work. It's all about the planning and the need to do that. And of course, the policy has changed, because it used to be that government and councils didn't want people living in towns and cities. They wanted them out in the suburbs. But there are so many empty spaces in our towns and villages now. Either shops are not open and the whole building is in need of renovation, or living over the shop seems to be something that doesn't happen anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, the problem with some of these is that a number of banks or lenders, they frown upon, or it's part of their policy, that they won't lend to a property above a commercial, no matter what that is. You know, it doesn't have to be a kebab shop that can go on fire. It can simply be an office. And but, you know, their policy is they just don't lend above commercial.
Yeah,
so that makes it more difficult. There is restrictions to borrowers who can actually, go and borrow money from an institution to do that.
And if it's not the lenders that won't lend, there's higher insurance rates for properties above commercial units.
Yeah, so back to the banks again, which is something that we've been talking about, as you can imagine, on the show today. But I wanted to ask you, as entrepreneurs, as UK entrepreneurs, and as someone who took a risk, walked away from their jobs, decided they were going to do this for themselves, is the UK still a good place to be an entrepreneur, do you think?
I think it's certainly got a lot more difficult. Well, put it this way. The answer is yes, because there will always be opportunities. So we are glass half full people, and we wouldn't be in business in the UK if we didn't think there was opportunities. But the question is, are there better places to be entrepreneurs and invest your money? Are there better countries that are more entrepreneurial focused? Absolutely, there is, and that's certainly what we found since we've been in business, and we have the opportunity to look at investments all over the place now. There are simply better opportunities, out with the UK, and that's frustrating.
Yeah, I'm sure it is frustrating. And just finally, I know that one of the things you feel very strongly about is not just being an entrepreneur, but in giving back. And you've recently climbed base camp on Mount Everest. Tell us very briefly about what you did and who that was for.
Okay, so Graham and I, all our married life, we've gave back to various charities that we've been passionate about for different reasons. Our daughter was diagnosed in 2008 with type 1 diabetes, and since then we've done a lot of fundraising for them. So in May this year we climbed Everest Base Camp to raise funds, and it was fantastic. So
for JDRF. For
JDRF in the UK.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, thank you for doing that, and thanks very much for coming on the show today and telling us why you feel that you have a role to play in the housing market here in the UK. Thanks very much for coming on the show. Well, it was really good to hear there from Graham and Leanne, and to hear about their journey as entrepreneurs here in the UK. But that's it for this hour. But I'll be back at 12 noon with more, including one of the lead claimants in a civil suit against the Department of Health over the contaminated blood scandal. Stay with us. Here's the weather.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vaughtry here with your latest GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. We have two areas of low pressure with us at the moment. The first, tracking its way across northern areas of Scotland, bringing this secluded front with some showers at times. The second one pushing its way into the southwest. We've already started to see some rain move into southwest England, turning heavier for parts of Wales into Northern Ireland later on as well, and certainly the sky is turning quite grey through here. Some sunnier spells still in between the showers that bubble up across northern England into Scotland, but some of those showers still on the sharp side in places. Temperatures ranging between 18 and 20 degrees Celsius, perhaps 22 across the far east of England, but increasingly humid as we head into tonight with this rain and cloud pushing its way through, breezy as well, particularly gusty around some coastal areas. Outbreaks of rain continuing for many, progressing its way up into Scotland, but it's the far north of Scotland that will likely stay dry with some clearer spells, and under those clearer skies will turn a bit chillier, down to around 5 degrees Celsius in some sheltered villages. A much warmer and more humid start to everywhere else on Monday morning. The rain tracking across the Channel Islands, lingering along some coast of southern England, but a few brighter spells trying to develop in places, that's still with the risk of showers at times. The rain looking like it will push into northern areas of Scotland, but generally central southern Scotland as well, seeing some more persistent areas of rain. Generally feeling rather cool for most of us with all of that rain and clouds around, and further unsettled spells, particularly to come on Wednesday. Bye-bye.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com? You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching. Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon and welcome back to Sunday with Arlene Foster. An early afternoon of political and topical debate. Well, kicking us off for this hour, we're asking whether the Conservatives can find political salvation by attacking Labour's anti-motorist policies. The Tory candidate for Uxbridge and South Ruislip snatched victory from the jaws of defeat in last week's by-election by going all out against the expansion of the ultra-low emission zone. But is it a formula that can be repeated nationwide? Then I've got GB News' favourite lefty, Paul Embry, on to debate strikes. Rail passengers have faced another chaotic weekend as train workers walked out over pay and conditions. Is there any end in sight for the dispute? And later in the show, I'll be joined by Jason Evans, the lead claimant in a civil suit against the Department of Health over the contaminated blood inquiry. Jason was only 4 when he lost his father, who'd been infected with hepatitis and HIV during routine treatments for his haemophilia. All of that to come, but first, your latest news headlines with Ray.
Good afternoon, 1 minute past 12. I'm Ray Addison in the GB Newsroom. Our top story this hour, former Home Secretary Dame Priti Patel has told GB News the government needs to clamp down on lefty lawyers to stop illegal migration. She says the Attorney General and Lord Chancellor need to take action over how law firms behave. That's as the number of channel crossings continues to climb, with more than 14,700 people intercepted in small boats so far this year. Dame Priti warns that the clock is ticking for the government to implement its new illegal migration bill.
We need a deterrent factor for a start, and removals and returns. My Rwanda plan was central to that. The returns agreements that, I have put in place and others are now putting in place. We have to get planes leaving the country and show that if you come here illegally, you can't just get a free pass. Being firm is actually the stance that we should take, and that means removing people and returning people to other third countries or country of origin.
The Energy and Security Secretary says he and his family have struggled to open accounts at major banks in the wake of the Nigel Farage row. Grant Shapps told The Sun that the problem stems from being a politically exposed person. He accused banks of going too far. It comes as Mr Farage launched a new website to help people who, like him, have had their bank accounts forcibly closed. The GB News presenter says 1,000 accounts are being shut every day.
What I've learned in the 3 weeks since I came out, as it were, I've just been inundated by small businesses, by folk all around the country, people in absolute fear, terror, lives being ruined, thousands of businesses being closed.
Well, the government's energy security plans will be unveiled this week, aiming to power up Britain from Britain. The Prime Minister and the Energy Security Secretary are due to meet bosses from the UK's oil and gas, renewable and nuclear industries. They're expected to reveal a raft of new investment plans, driven in part by the need for greater energy independence since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Mike Ingram is a consulting senior market strategist. He told us it's all tactics and no strategy.
Starting point, we haven't built a nuclear reactor in the UK since 1995. We're paying about 60% more than the European average wholesale for wholesale electricity prices. We are saddled with a net zero project, which amongst other things is going to deliver things like heat pumps, which are unaffordable and completely impractical for many of the people lower down on the income scale. And we're taxing our oil and gas industry, which has been mentioned in this, at 75%.
The Prime Minister is ordering a review into the rollout of low-traffic neighbourhoods. The scheme, which has been used by councils to stop drivers cutting through residential areas, has been seen by some as an attack on motorists. In an interview with the Sunday Telegraph, Rishi Sunak said he supports people's right to use their cars to do all the things that matter to them. Shadow International Trade Secretary Nick Thomas-Symonds told us the PM should leave the decision to local areas.
Our position is that it is for communities to make these decisions, whether it is in terms of low traffic neighbourhoods, where, by the way, there are communities up and down the country who want to reduce traffic going through their neighbourhoods, whether it is in terms of clean air zones. We've talked obviously specifically about ULEZ. Yes, we certainly believe a well-planned low traffic neighbourhood is a good thing.
The HS2 programme has been given a red rating by the infrastructure watchdog. It believes the timetable for construction of the first 2 phases of the rail line from London to Birmingham and then on to Crewe are unachievable. The IPA's annual report, which follows the resignation of Chief Executive Mark Thurston, cites major issues with the schedule and the budget. HS2 was initially slated to open in 2026. This has now been delayed by up to 7 years. You're watching GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get straight back to Dame Arlene.
Thanks to Ray, and welcome back to the show. Now, Sadiq Khan celebrated this week as his plan to expand London's ultra-low emission zone to include the city's outer boroughs was ruled lawful by the High Court. But should he be? If polling and Labour's performance in Uxbridge and South Ruislip are anything to go by, it would seem anti-motors policies are a huge electoral liability for the party. So can the Conservatives turn the politics of the road into an election-winning formula? I'll be discussing that with my guests in just a moment, but first, Lisa Hartle brings us up to date.
On Friday, the High Court ruled in favour of the Mayor of London after 5 Conservative-led councils had challenged his proposals to expand the ultra-low emission zone to Greater London. Vehicles that are classed as more polluting will be charged £12.50 a day to drive in these areas. The reason? TfL say it'll reduce the number of deaths caused by polluted air. But those opposed to the plan say there isn't enough evidence to show the expansion will make a difference to air quality, and they're concerned that it'll impact the poorest in society.
I'm going to continue to put pressure on the Mayor not to go ahead with this. This is going to have savagely bad consequences for thousands of my constituents. And not just my constituents, of course, because it will impact on people who live outside Greater London, people that have no say over who is the Mayor of London and what policies he pursues, because they don't have a vote in the London mayoral election. So the estimate that Sadiq Khan makes of 9 in 10 cars being compliant, there's already been some question marks over that. But of course, he's not counting people that need to come in to Greater London on a daily basis from outside who will be hit by this.
Hertfordshire is one of the counties which will border a ULEZ area. Some local businesses say although they're not directly in the ULEZ zone, the new expansion will affect them. A plumber's merchant in Potters Bar say tradespeople will be hit.
The way things are, there's people that can't afford to do certain things now, and obviously there's a lot of guys that their van is their tool, so they can't afford to change their vehicle, so they've got no choice but to pay their congestion, their ULEZ fee.
Those working in a carpet shop say this new expansion could see people leave the profession.
Most of the guys, self-employed carpet fitters, have got vans that aren't compliant. For a transit van nowadays that's compliant, we're going to be looking at about £40,000. I think it could put a few of them to the point where they're near retirement now, and the thought of having to buy new vehicles or pay £12.50 a day will put them off, and they'll probably have to give it in.
The decision to expand the ultra-low emission zone was a difficult one, not one I took lightly, but it's the right one because it's vital we make more progress cleaning up the air in our city. It's a fact that air pollution in our city leads to around 4,000 premature deaths a year, leads to children having stunted lungs forever, and adults with a whole host of health issues from asthma to cancer, dementia to heart disease.
Well, as a driver myself, I have a hybrid, so I'm assuming it doesn't affect me. But for other drivers or to-be drivers, it's going to have a lot of restrictions for them, because essentially it's going to be difficult for them financially to justify driving to London.
The people who have the least money are the most affected, and if that's what Khan represents and he's trying to say, you know, I'm helping everybody, he isn't. He's penalising people.
And as a consequence of me listening, next week we'll be massively expanding the support Londoners receive. Every family in London, that's almost 1 million families who receives child benefit, will be eligible for support from next week. Every small business in London will be eligible for support from next week, and every charity in London.
Get called out! Get called out! Despite huge opposition, the expansion of ULEZ is set to take place on the 29th of August. Lisa Hartle, GB News, London.
Thanks to Lisa for that little update on what's been happening. Well, Ed Gemmell is the leader of the Climate Party, and very pleased to say he joins me in the studio. Ed, I was talking to you before you came on air, and I was asking, why the Climate Party? Why not the Green Party? Perhaps you'd like to tell our viewers and listeners why.
Yeah, sure, certainly. So the Climate Party is pro-business, pro-climate, really going out targeting both centre and right voters. and very much focused on the opportunity of climate change.
Yes.
Look, this is where we're going. 150 countries have set net zero targets or are setting them. That's the direction of travel in terms of the new clean industries. And we need to bring our targets forward, get at the front of that new industrial revolution and lead it.
Yeah.
Offshored our industry for the last 40 years. Let's onshore it now and start making sure we make stuff here and make money from it.
Yeah. No, that's very interesting. I wanted to give you the opportunity to do that. So Ed, tell us, what do you feel about this ULEZ expansion into those different areas of London and beyond?
Well, as you know, I've been pretty personally up with it, actually, having done been a candidate in the Uxbridge by-election. And ULEZ is clearly an issue. I mean, I think let's talk probably first about maybe how to improve it, and then secondly about the attitude on the street from it, because I had a lot of experience.
Yeah.
In terms of how to improve it, we wrote to Sadiq Khan, and we actually said to him in a letter in the middle of the campaign saying, look, good idea, clean air, reduce pollution. That's a great idea, and everybody on the street agrees with it. But what we need to do is do it in a way where it works for Londoners. So not this cliff edge on the 29th of August, but introduce it over 5 years. Maybe £2.50 first year, gradually graded up to £12.50.
Yes.
You wouldn't see then the spike in the cost of second-hand compliant vehicles, cheap electrics and hybrids, which is happening, and the same with the vans. And you wouldn't see that massive drop in the value of the cheaper cars that people who have non-compliant cars now have to face when they sell it. The second part is all about an optic. You can see Sadiq Khan at the moment talking about he's listened, that he's now going to look after 1 million families, that he's going to increase the access now for small businesses to support. But the optic's not good. Why not just come out and say all of the money that's coming in on the scheme, which is estimated to be between 100 and 300 million in the first year, put it all to support those people and those businesses. Don't try and take any of it to anything else.
Yeah.
Just support always the most vulnerable businesses and people, and you probably wouldn't get the complaints that you've been hearing.
Yeah, so make it a neutral cost and actually put the money back in to help those people who it hits hardest, because it seems to me, as often happens in this case, people on benefits, people who are in receipt of benefits will get assistance with this scheme. However, the working poor, as we call them, will find it the most difficult.
No, I mean, absolutely. And in fact, we explained this quite a lot when we were out campaigning. And there's a very good example of what was happening there. So an example, Raj, small business owner, he's got 4 minibuses that he was running a business at the time. He was polishing his minibus as I ran round to give him a leaflet and talk to him. And
you were a brave man.
Well, and he explained straight away. He said, look, he said, I'm selling my minibuses because of ULEZ, can't afford to keep business. I'm going on the dole. Then when we talked about the scheme I just described to you, so over a 5-year period, so you wouldn't see this cliff edge, and all the money coming back to support people, and he basically said, yeah, I could see that working. I wouldn't be selling my minibuses now, and I think we do need clean air, we do need to get rid of pollution, so I'd probably be for it.
Yeah.
And that's from a man fully affected.
Yeah, and we were talking about this earlier in the show with Nigel Nelson, our political correspondent. We were saying, our political commentator, we were saying that people want better air, people want to be a part of the climate change agenda. But when it's disproportionately hitting them in terms of finances, then they step back from it.
Well,
and that's the problem.
Absolutely. In this particular instance, it's about the most vulnerable. You know, it's about 5 or 10% of people and businesses that are going to be affected by it, and you've got to look after them. But in actual fact, you can achieve your aim, which is clean air, less pollution, by taking all the money and looking after them with it. And that would be pretty reasonable, and everybody would buy into it.
Well, people just see it as a tax, another tax on their businesses and indeed on their lives. But the Prime Minister has come out batting for motorists today, and I'm sure you've seen that interview that he gave to the Sunday Telegraph. He's saying, I'm on the motorist side. What do you think about that message?
OK, well, I think it's just political positioning to begin with. I don't think it means anything. I think if we were to take it seriously, what he's trying to say, actually, is what we want to do is we want to pretend it's going to cost you less if we tinker around with these policies and push them back. Where we're not seeing from him, or I'm afraid from Keir Starmer, is any real leadership on the bigger issue of climate change. And that's very much like I said at the beginning. There is a massive, massive opportunity that we're about to lose out on in the UK. And if we're going to get ourselves at the front and lead this industrial revolution, we need to get some much earlier targets and then target all of our financial response and private enterprise as well and private finance into getting there. Roll our sleeves up, make this the national mission, lead the world in doing it, and then we'll be doing a lot of innovations, making a lot of money, and Britain will then be able to pay for all of the services and things that at the moment we worry about. So people on the street have said, worried about the NHS, not funded enough. Worried about the police, not funded enough. Worried about the cost of living. Worried about sticky inflation. If we had a much bigger industrial opportunity here, and it can all be clean, that's not smokestacks with soot coming out the top, we'd be making things and we'd see all of the money flowing that we could then use to invest in them. So it's very short-sighted for the Prime Minister to give this impression that by rowing back on some of these climate change policies, he's going to help anybody. What he should be doing is gripping the metal, and actually saying, look, we can do this as Britain. Let's lead it. Let's make some money, and then we can deal with all of these issues because we'll have money in the bank.
But Ed, I mean, people don't believe that we're going to make money, and that's the fundamental problem, because when you have someone of the status of Lord Hammond, who used to be the Chancellor of this country, saying that he told the then Prime Minister that it was going to cost £1 trillion to get to net zero by 2050, that's an enormous amount of money. And then people say, well, she was told this, so why are we going down this route? Especially when China and places like that are actually, you know, making as much carbon as they always did.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we're talking about $1 trillion of cost. Well, if we were in a business, we'd be saying $1 trillion of investment. And McKinsey's have given out figures, probably subsequent, actually, to when Lord Hammond said that, actually, which say that it's already going to be worth $1 trillion to us in terms of GDP between now and 2030. And that's without advanced targets, without any ambition.
So you're saying invest to save, is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. 275 trillion, McKinsey is saying, at the current rate for the world, going towards 2050. So there's massive amounts of money to be made. And if you bring it forward, the investment cycle is shorter, the return on investment is quicker, we stop buying our solar panels from China, we make the second generation here, we sell them back to China, we see a balance of payments that helps us.
And what do you say then to the fact that Tony Blair, who seems to be coming very much back into the political arena again behind Keir Starmer, is also raising questions about things like ULEZ and net zero for that fact as well? What do you make of all of that?
Well, to be honest, I mean, I was very surprised with what Tony Blair said. I think he just bumped his head before he did the interview, actually. I just can't quite understand it. We'll see later on.
You and I both know that Tony Blair is a man who likes to take the temperature and listen to what's going on. And if he thinks it's going to damage Keir Starmer to be associated with ULEZ, I think he's probably waving an alarm there.
Right. I think, sort of, to Keir Starmer, I think the number one thing is to show you've got leadership potential, to show you've got great integrity, and when the going gets tough, to go and say, right, this may not be popular, but I'm going to explain to you why we need to do it. I'm going to explain it so that people can get behind it and understand that I'm a man of integrity. In the actual election in Uxbridge, we had the problem that the Labour candidate flipped from being anti-ULEZ to from being pro-ULEZ to anti-ULEZ, when we all know that currently the Labour whip would require him to vote against it at the moment. I don't think that helped him. I reckon there's 1,000 Labour voters who just sat at home and said, actually, I don't want to go out and vote today. I might not vote Conservative, but I'm just not bothering because of that.
Yeah. Ed, we've been talking about a completely different subject all week on this station, as you know, about banking.
Right.
Are you a politically exposed person? Do you know whether you're a politically exposed person?
My bank hasn't rung me up and said they're cancelling my account or anything like that. I suspect, no, absolutely. I suspect that I'm not in the financial bracket that I'd be in one of these most exclusive banks that might look at it a little bit more. So I'm, an ordinary person with an ordinary bank account. Yes, I've looked on it a little bit, actually, with worry on this, not personally.
Yeah.
But I do think that we shouldn't have, certainly in terms of the basic services, and in fact, it wasn't the basic services that were being cancelled in the case of Nigel Farage, but in general terms, I think banking should be open to everybody. But you cannot function at a bank now.
Yeah, well, what I think Nigel has done, though, has been a catalyst to everybody else coming forward and saying, well, I was denied a bank account for no obvious reason. So that I think the story is growing as opposed to going away. Ed, it's been really lovely to have a conversation with you today. Thanks for coming in. That's
fantastic.
Ed Gemmell, who's the leader of the Climate Party. Now, after the break, Paul Embry and I will be debating the strike action that's causing misery for rail passengers.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vaughtry here with your latest GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. You might be hoping for a change of type in our weather over the next few days, but it is unfortunately looking to remain relatively unsettled. This area of low pressure throughout the rest of Sunday is going to be pushing in from the Atlantic with these weather fronts already providing rain into southwest England, some heavier bursts for Wales, Northern Ireland later on into Northern England, southeast England also turning fairly damp and grey as well. The breeze will be building particularly gusty along some coastal areas. The rain gradually pushing its its way into Scotland overnight, but the far north of Scotland should stay largely dry with some clear intervals and actually turning relatively chilly underneath those clear skies, down to as low as 5 degrees Celsius in some rural villages. But elsewhere, it'll be a much milder and humid start to Monday morning. Outbreaks of rain still continuing across the Channel Islands, southern coast of England. A few brighter spells trying to develop into the afternoon, so might actually make it feel a touch warmer on Monday compared to Sunday for parts of Wales, southwest England, but still with showers around at times. The rain that will progress its way into Scotland, though, that will probably make it feel rather cooler compared to Sunday here. Temperatures ranging between 17 and 22 degrees Celsius. Some of those showers and outbreaks of rain will still be lingering first thing on Tuesday morning, potentially quite heavy for parts of Wales, southern England first thing, but a few brighter, sunnier spells once again trying to develop in there, so a bit more sunshine compared to Monday in general. But further wet and windy weather is on the cards, particularly as we head towards Wednesday. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
Please stop. Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point. But
and action.
Sergeant, the big green, my superstar panel that are already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in their home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the show. And rail passengers have faced more disruption this weekend as members of the RMT union walked out once again. 14 rail companies were affected by the 24-hour walkout beginning yesterday morning, whilst the ASLEF union will also take industrial action on Monday. Meanwhile, more than 3,000 workers at 16 councils in England and Wales have also voted in favour of strike action over pay. Well, I'm joined now to discuss this by Paul Embry. He's an author, fireman, trade unionist and the unofficial holder of the title of GB News' favourite lefty. Paul, really good to see you. This is just like old times on the political correction, isn't it? You and I discussing...
Isn't it just lovely to see you too, Arlene?
Yeah, you and I discussing strikes. I have a memory of us doing this back in the political correction, and we're still talking about strikes. I mean, this is holiday time, Paul. You and I both know that. People like to get out and about on trains. This is an attack on families, isn't it?
No, I mean, look, nobody wants to take strike action. I'm somebody who's taken strike action a number of times in my career. It's not something you ever want to do because, of course, as a worker, you lose money yourself when you're taking strike action. You're also denying a service to your own family because, of course, your own family rely on the services that you're providing. But the truth is, Arlene, that there are millions of workers in this country, rail workers, junior doctors, council workers, teachers, people in the private sector, who are seeing their real wages fall off a cliff, frankly, and are struggling to make ends meet. They're struggling to pay their mortgages and their energy bills. And I think, you know, for people to government or whoever to expect these people just to keep sucking it up, just to keep seeing their real wages falling and their living standards crashing is unreasonable. So nobody likes taking strike action, but sometimes it's necessary. And I think in the cases we're seeing at the moment, it is certainly necessary.
Well, the Department of Transport have put out a release saying that they put an offer to the unions and the unions should put that offer to their members to resolve the dispute. And I think the same point has been made by the Rail Delivery Group, Paul. Surely it's the case that unions should put that offer to their members to try and get a breakthrough on all of this.
Well, look, I think it's up to trade unions to decide how they deal with these issues internally. I've been in situations where, as a trade union official, you receive an offer from management which, frankly, is so derisory, you know, you feel comfortable about rejecting it on behalf of your members because you're constantly consulting with your members. You know what their expectations are. And of course, if union officials are not representing their members, then they get kicked out at the ballot box. I detect nothing, Arlene, to say that the RMT leadership is losing any sort of support among rank and file members. In fact, it seems to be one of the trade union leaderships in this country that enjoys most support, I think, from its rank and file members, which tells me that they are probably doing something right. But look, RMT members, I think, have got a legitimate claim. And as I said, the other people taking strike action across the public sector and private sector have got legitimate claims because the truth is that the economy is fundamentally unbalanced. We're seeing some people still doing very nicely. We're seeing some of our corporations recording record profits. You know, NatWest recording huge mega billion profits despite its recent troubles a couple of days ago. British Gas, directors' pay going up, city bonuses going up. That, I think, is where our target should be. If we're in the business of criticising people for being unreasonable, perhaps we should be criticising some of those corporations and top bosses.
Well, certainly the British Gas profit share was absolutely incredible, and I think government should be looking at having discussions with them about a rebate to a lot of their customers because people have had to pay so much over this past period of time. But anyway, I'm diverging off the issue. Council workers, of course, are now talking about striking as well, Paul. And indeed, some workers up in Citizens Advice in Hull and East Riding are going on strike tomorrow. This has a feel about it, Paul, that it's political, that it's not just about the wages, it's not just about the conditions. This is a Tory government, we're going to make them suffer, so let's go out and strike.
No, I don't accept that. And the reason I don't accept it, Arlene, is because these days things in terms of trade union law is very different from the 1970s, for example, where a trade union leader can just say everybody out and everybody had to down tools and walk out. Nowadays, trade unions have to go through very rigorous procedures before they can get strike action off the ground. They have to have a secret ballot, a democratic postal ballot, of all of their members, and it is those members who decide whether or not the trade union shall take strike action, not just the leadership. So I don't accept that all of these thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who are currently involved in this wave of strike action have many of whom have never been on strike before, by the way, have just woken up one morning and thought, well, we don't like the Tories, we don't like the Tory government, and I'm going to withdraw my Labour in an attempt to bring down the Tory government. What they're doing is reacting to the economic situation that's confronting them, the cost of living crisis, the fact they're finding it difficult to make ends meet. That's why they're taking strike action, these people.
OK, Paul. Well, look, really good to see you again and hopefully see you soon. Well, in a few minutes, I'll be talking to Jason Evans, whose father was one of the thousands of victims of the contaminated blood scandal. But before that, here's an update on your latest news headlines with Ray Addison.
Thanks, Arlene. 12:31, our top story. Former Home Secretary Dame Priti Patel has told GB News the government needs to clamp down on, quote, lefty lawyers to stop illegal migration. She says the Attorney General and the Lord Chancellor need to take action over how law firms behave. That's as the number of Channel crossings continues to climb, with more than 14,700 people intercepted in small boats so far this year alone. Dame Priti warns that the clock is ticking for the government to implement its new illegal migration bill. The Energy and Security Secretary says he and his family have struggled to open accounts at major banks in the wake of the Nigel Farage row. Grant Shapps told The Sun the problem stems from being a politically exposed person. He accused the banks of going too far. It comes as Mr Farage launched a new website to help people who, like him, have had their bank accounts forcibly closed. The Prime Minister is ordering a review into the rollout of low-traffic neighbourhoods. The scheme, which has been used by councils to stop drivers cutting through residential areas, has been seen by some as an attack on motorists. In an interview with the Sunday Telegraph, Rishi Sunak said he supports people's right to use their cars to do all the things that matter to them. The government's energy security plans will be unveiled this week, aiming to power up Britain from Britain. The Prime Minister and the Energy Security Secretary are due to meet bosses from the UK's oil and gas, renewable and nuclear industries. They're expected to reveal a raft of new investment plans, driven in part by the need for greater energy independence since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Well, you can get more on all of those stories and more by visiting our website, gbnews.com. Now let's get straight back to Dame Arlene.
Thanks for that, Ray. Well, Jason Evans was just 4 years old when he lost his father, Jonathan, who had been infected with HIV and hepatitis C while being treated for haemophilia. He was just one of thousands of victims of the scandal of contaminated blood clotting products used in the United Kingdom. Jason is now the director and chair of the campaigning organisation Factor 8 and the lead claimant in a legal action currently before the High Court. And Jason, I'm delighted to say, joins me now live from Coventry. Jason, lovely to have you on the programme. This has obviously been a difficult week. We've heard the blood inquiry has been back in the news again. We heard from the Chancellor, we heard from the Prime Minister. What was your take on the wrap-up of the inquiry?
Yeah, good afternoon, Arlene. Well, it was certainly a disappointing week. I can say that for sure. I mean, coming into that week of hearings, victims and families, I think, had been hopeful that the government might, at long last, show their hand and tell us what recommendations from the inquiry they're going to be accepting and what the timetable for implementation was going to be, or at least in principle, some reassurance that this is going to happen. And after listening, through all of the witnesses, including, as you say there, the Prime Minister and the Chancellor, we didn't get anything close to that. And by the time those hearings ended, the disappointment was massive. I sat in the hearing room, in particular during the Prime Minister's evidence, and you could just feel the tension. People left the hearing room, very upset, in tears in some cases, halfway through the evidence. And yeah, not a good week at all.
Yeah, and this has been obviously a personal campaign from your perspective because of the fact that you lost your father when you were very young. You wanted to try and ensure that there was justice for that early death of your father, and indeed for many others across the whole of the United Kingdom. And the inquiry, when it was set up, what were your hopes for the inquiry? It was set up by the former Prime Minister, Theresa May. What were your hopes for the inquiry at that time?
Well, the very reason that Factor 8 was set up as a campaign group to begin with was to try and obtain a public inquiry. That was our only goal, really, at that time. And the reason was because going all the way back, to 1990 and even before that, the government's position had been in relation to compensation, what this week's hearings have focused on, was that as a principle, we do not pay compensation unless there is fault on the part of the government, unless there is liability. And that question of liability in relation to infected blood products had always been outstanding. And so over the decades where many people, including my own father, had campaigned for compensation, that was always the fallback position. And so when Factor 8 began, our position was, okay, let's go for this liability point once and for all. Let's go for this prove unequivocally there was fault once and for all. And the important thing now is that as of April, the inquiry has published its final recommendations in relation to compensation, saying there was fault and that wrongdoing had been done on an individual, systemic and collective level. So we've gone through 6 years of doing what the government had told us to do to establish wrongdoing. Now, having done that, they're still dragging their heels on compensation.
And the inquiry has taken you, no doubt, and all of the other families on a journey where you can tell your story about what happened in individual cases. For you, Jason, I suppose now you have to wait for the government to react to the inquiry, and you're saying that they should have already done that because the inquiry has made it clear that there was fault and that there should be compensation. Clearly, you can't back away now until that issue is dealt with.
That's correct. I think not just in light of the final compensation recommendations of the inquiry, but also the evidence that we've all sat and read and listened to over these last years. And in particular, I wanted to mention, just last night I was speaking to another campaigner and we talked about what is now kind of an infamous document that the inquiry was able to obtain in relation to one of the pharmaceutical companies, Immuno AG, which manufactured a blood product called cryobilin. And there's an extract from a letter, and this was back in 1976, where in relation to this blood product cryobilin, the company says that the British market will accept a higher risk of hepatitis for a lower priced product.
Goodness.
And I think really that document is one of many that just kind of encapsulates why this is a scandal, that it wasn't some unfortunate accident, that this is a real scandal. This is profits before lives in the truest sense. And no, we can't back away now. We've come too far. And I think what really is important in the progress that we've made is the narrative has totally changed, because for too many decades, governments of all parties said that nothing wrong had happened here. Rishi Sunak, when he gave evidence on Wednesday, he said that we had been, quote, lied to for decades. So I'm glad that it's now accepted. Not only was this a scandal, but also there was a cover-up. Even the government now accepts that, which I think only raises further questions for the victims of why are we still waiting when it's accepted there was wrongdoing, it's accepted there was a cover-up. And now what needs to happen is that some form resolution, some form of justice and closure takes place for all those infected and families.
Well, Jason, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show today and telling us about your journey, and I want to wish you well for the future as well. So thank you so much for coming on today. That's Jason Evans there, who has been battling around the infected blood scandal after he lost his father when he was just 4 years old. Well, now, after the break, guess who's back? Former Prime Minister Sir Tony Blair made some surprising remarks on net zero this week. I'll discuss all of that with Chief Political Commentator for The Independent, John Renton, next.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching. Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back for the end of the show, as I call it. Well, we started this hour looking at the issue of ULEZ and net zero, and a surprising intervention on the subject came from former Prime Minister Tony Blair, who warned against asking the public to do a, quote, huge amount to achieve net zero when the carbon output of countries like China would dwarf any progress we make. Does it point to potential differences of opinion in the Labour Party over how to address climate change? Well, to discuss this, I'm joined by Chief Political Commentator for The Independent, John Rentoul, and I'm also welcoming back to the studio GB News Senior Political Commentator, Nigel Nelson. John, really good to see you. And what did you make of this intervention?
Hi there.
What did you make of this intervention by Tony Blair? I mean, Nigel Nelson was saying it appears that some people in the Labour Party are becoming a bit wobbly on climate change.
Well, I mean, Tony Blair knows what he's talking about. I mean, he actually did make climate change a big issue when he was Prime Minister, and he thought about, I think, spending quite a lot of his post-Prime Ministerial time on the issue, but he's gone quiet since. And yes, it was a surprise to have him pop up and point out that, you know, we can make all the efforts we like in this country, but China's growth in emissions can dwarf the entire British output of global warming gases in just 1 year.
Yeah, and the fact that he is now coming back on the stage, John, is quite significant, isn't it? I mean, is he trying to be the ideas person behind Keir Starmer, do you think?
Well, he's succeeding, I think. I mean, Keir Starmer ought to listen to him and is listening to him. I mean, he'd be mad not to. You know, this is Labour's most successful ever Prime Minister, three-time election winner. I mean, if Keir Starmer didn't listen to him, then he would need his head examining. But Tony Blair has also set up this institute, which is producing really high quality and useful work for any government that wants to pick it up. And Keir Starmer ought to make sure he gets there first. But the climate change issue is fascinating because it divides both parties. We've seen the Tories at odds on it too, because it is a very, very big issue. How do you get to net zero, and how much is it going to cost?
Yeah, and Nigel joins us again. Nigel Nelson, I mean, you've heard what John has said there about Starmer would be mad not to listen to Tony Blair. You would agree with that, wouldn't you?
I would indeed, yeah. And I think that the important thing here is it's not just about asking Tony Blair how to win elections. It's also about avoiding the mistakes New Labour made.
Sure.
So it's things like, I mean, you know, Tony Blair's pledge card from '97, that famous pledge card, was hugely successful. He did cut class sizes to under 30. He sorted out the economy. Debt was 40%. It's now 100%. He got 250,000 under 25s off benefits into work and 100,000 off NHS waiting lists, and then realised he made a mistake because it wasn't about getting people off the waiting list. It was about getting waiting times down.
Yes.
So he then changed that, and so 18-month waits became 18-week waits. And so I think there's things like showing Keir Starmer, watch out for targets, because if you measure yourself against a target, they may not work. Another one was a 4-hour wait in A&E. Hospitals got round that by simply moving people out of A&E before the 4 hours were up. They were still sick. They hadn't been treated. So it's things like that.
They met their targets.
But they met the target. I think they got a 96% success rate. But the target didn't tell the full story. So it's that kind of advice that Tony Blair can give to Keir Starmer. And I think that as John says, he'd be mad not to listen to it.
And, John, it's interesting, isn't it, when Nigel mentioned the pledge card there, I thought he was going to talk about the fact that Tony Blair used a pledge card in Northern Ireland after the Belfast Agreement, and he made pledges then. So it's something that he used again and again. So, but is that a 90s phenomenon, or how can he now really give strength and depth to Keir Starmer?
Well, I think Nigel put his finger on it there. I mean, actually, the pledge card turned out, I mean, it was a very good device for electioneering, but it wasn't a very good guide necessarily to governing. And, Tony Blair describes in his memoirs how he sort of looked at it once he was Prime Minister and scratched his head and said, what, is that it? And actually, it turned out to be very modest, and actually some of the targets weren't quite right. But what he's focusing on now is what governments ought to be doing, rather than how to campaign to win elections. Because I mean, he revolutionised that as New Labour, and a lot of those lessons have been learned. The Tories are copying it too. You've got Rishi Sunak's five promises a year, for example, which are a sort of pledge card style operation. But I think Tony Blair is much more interested in government and policy and staying ahead of the game on that. And that's why he bangs on about technology and artificial intelligence so much.
And tell me, John, were you surprised to hear Sir Keir Starmer say this week, when he was asked the question, what is a woman, he was able to say an adult human female? Were you surprised that he changed on that?
I was very pleased. Yes, yeah. He's this is Blairism for slow learners,
yes.
And I welcome it. I was very, very worried when Keir Starmer was elected leader, because the platform he stood on I thought was mumbo jumbo, and I didn't know where he really stood, and I still don't, to be honest. But I mean, if he's saying the right things, then that's half the battle. And the Labour Party's position on the trans issue was all over the place, and Keir Starmer, I thought, got it completely wrong. He's now in a much more sensible place, realising that you've got to respect everybody's rights, and that includes the rights of women to women-only spaces.
Yeah. And Nigel, did you see that as a moment? Because there had been a lot of confusion around Labour's position in all of this. And I mean, following social media and looking at all of the different positions which Labour had taken on the trans issue, he seems now to have given clarity, at least from his point of view, in relation to that issue.
Yes, I think it's been going step by step. He was caught out initially when he was asked, can a woman have a penis, and wasn't able to answer that question. And he's now thought it through. I think one of the problems is that for MPs, this is not a major issue. It doesn't seem to come up on the doorstep very much. The whole woke issue is very low down on people's worries. But Keir Starmer clearly had to get to a policy, and on the basis that he will still have a diagnosis of gender dysphoria before you can change gender. That seems sensible. He seems to want to protect women-only spaces. That seems sensible. I think he's getting there, and probably in government he will need to have another look at the Gender Recognition Act to try and get an awful lot of things that have happened since then, since 2004 when it came in, and get them right. Yeah.
And so finally, John, do you think he is looking more and more like our next Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, that is?
Well, I think he's done an absolutely remarkable job. I mean, I was among many who underestimated him. I mean, he's been helped, it has to be said, by the Conservatives doing the best they can to trash their reputation. I mean, the whole Liz Truss episode, which I thought, they could put behind them, because, Rishi Sunak was so obviously the right answer in the first place. And, once they got him in, he did put right all the things that Liz Truss got wrong. And she was only there for 7 weeks after all. But I'd underestimated the damage that has done to the reputation of the Conservatives for competence, and it really does seem to have destroyed it. So all Keir Starmer has to do is look reasonably competent and ask Tony Blair what to do. And as long as he does those two things, then I think he's heading for victory.
There you are, the recipe for success, which is there. Thanks, John. Thanks so much for coming on the show and joining us. And thanks, obviously, to Nigel as well for being with me today. Well, that's it for this week. But Emily Carver is coming up in a few minutes. Emily, tell me what you've got planned.
I want to dig into all this green related news. So we've seen Rishi Sunak, he's announcing a review into low traffic neighbourhoods, so we'll be getting stuck into that. Is that a good idea? Do you trust him? Do you trust the Prime Minister that he is on the side of drivers? Would you like him to go a little bit further and perhaps review net zero altogether? We'll be debating that. And also, I'm going to get stuck into the latest royal news as well. There seems to be a bit of trouble in paradise in Montecito, so we'll find out what's going on there.
Thanks so much, Emily, and it's great to have been here this week. Thank you to all my guests for being with me. Michael will be back next Sunday, and I'll see you all very soon.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vaughtry here with your latest GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. You might be hoping for a change of type in our weather over the next few days, but it is unfortunately looking to remain relatively unsettled. This area of low pressure throughout the rest of Sunday is going to be pushing in from the Atlantic with these weather fronts already providing rain into southwest